Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Here at Software People Stories, we are celebrating Women's Month with 5 different women being featured in series.
We have the distinct privilege to introduce 5 very inspiring women from different realms of technology. I would like to introduce Palashi, who's a research scholar from Cornell University, who's breaking the barriers between social impact and technology. Then we have Pooja SR, who comes from the investment background and social work. And now she is the managing director for Anita B, who shares her interesting journey. And next we have Vaishali James, who's a marketing professional for technology. And she talks about her journey of coming from a very humble background and breaking different arenas. Next, we have Pramita, who's a satellite engineer, and she talks about how do we take 75 people to the moon from India. And last but not the least, we have Bindu Sunil, who shares her passion of embedded and how she's changed her avatar to become a cloud engineer, and she's heading the cloud division in Wipro.
This whole month, every Friday, consecutively, we'll be releasing one new episode. Don't forget to listen to each one of them and get inspired.
Hi, good morning, Palashi. A very, very happy new year, and thank you for joining Software People Stories and featuring in the Women's Month of March. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Gayatri. It's exciting to be here. I've heard so much about the podcast, so it's an honor to be here.
So, like what we do with all our podcasters, Palashi, why don't you introduce yourself in with your own words?
Sure. So I'm Palashi. I am a PhD candidate in the Information Science Department at Cornell University. I am broadly interested in intersection of society and technology, and I come at it from lots of angles. I do a lot of research at different things, but my dissertation work and how I also got introduced to Gayatri has to do with how women in technology groups are working within the technology industry. And before this, I was working as many things, including a software engineer. And then I decided to venture into doing things at the intersection of technology and society in my work, which took me down many interesting paths. I worked with nonprofits, I worked with social startups, to eventually realize that I really was passionate about doing research. And so I decided that that's what I'm going to pursue. But that's a little bit about me.
Oh, wow, I have so many questions to ask you, Palashi. I think I'll probably first ask the elephant in the room. What is your dissertation all about? I know you're saying from the whole intersection of society, technology, and women, some level of women, and the diversity and everything, right? Can you throw a little light on that? And then I will ask about, Rishi Moolam or a why part of it. But can you throw a little more light on your dissertation?
Definitely. So actually, I have been working at the intersection of trying to understand the relationship between gender and technology over the last decade, actually, almost. And this pursuit has taken me in different directions. So although my dissertation is specifically looking at relationships of gender and other relationships associated with gender in technology, I've done work in the past on trying to also study how caste and political networks operate in Twitter and things like that. So those kind of work are part of the dissertation, but not a big part. They're like smaller projects. But the main dissertation project is looking at how women in technology groups are collectivizing around questions of gender in the field of technology, what kind of work are they doing in these spaces, what kind of changes they want to see. And then broadly, I'm also talking to diversity and inclusion experts to understand how they see this space changing, how they've seen the space evolve, what they see happening going forward. And also, I'm trying to understand the intersections of gender with other relationships, so class, caste, and like sexuality and things like that. But that's not a very big part of my work. It's something that's trying to nuance the understanding of gender in the field of technology a little bit. So that's like a broad overview of what the project is. The dissertation is still being written, so I'm afraid that I don't have the full picture yet, but it should be hopefully done by the end of this year. So I might have a better picture in the future of what exactly it's going to be like. But that's broadly what it's about.
Wow, sounds very, very exciting, Palashi. Because when we started off as a career in women in technology, right? We didn't, while we always knew that less women were in college and eventually in office or in organizations also, we never took that as a lens and tried to explore that in depth. I think thank you for doing that. I think that is super critical for the future generations to rely on. Palashi, what made you take this path? I think many people, right? Most of us take the path that is often taken in terms of you have a good, a well-paying technology job. You yeah, you excel in that and try to try to take sub paths from there. What made you make that shift from being I know you were working in Deloitte and as a software engineer, and then you moved. So what made you take that shift?
So that's a great question, because I was actually I have to give credit to the fact that my engineering education was um, a bit multidisciplinary than compared to a lot of colleges. So I went to this college called Dhirubhai Ambani Institute, which back then was, nobody knew about it, but I think it's become more popular over time. But what was unique about the kind of education it was giving at that point of time was that we were required to take certain courses in humanities and social sciences as part of our training as engineers. And I think that's where the journey of like me being interested in the intersection of trying to understand how technology is shaping our society and how society in turn shapes the field of technology began. And we had some brilliant professors who I really enjoyed talking to and learning from. And I actually did my undergrad thesis on how do you design web tools to teach history in classrooms in a way that gives more options to students to explore history. And the reason I bring this up is that I think the interest was really already established early on, but as you said, it's hard to make these kind of decisions, especially when when you come from like thinking your family is also telling you that you should go for a safe option, and technology industry is a safe thing to pursue because you'll get a stable job, and there are guarantees around. And back then, like obviously IT was a big boom, and so I was not very sure whether and what will come out of this interest that I had developed in college. But after working in the industry, not for very long, like only a year and a half, I quickly understood that I was very interested. I was good at coding and I could code, but I was not very interested in business and business applications of code, which I think was one of the big indications for me where I was like, I want to be motivated in building technology. So actually, the first thing I wanted to do was build technologies to affect social change, or like build or make a difference in society. So one of the first jobs I took up after working at Deloitte was at this this organization called Feminist Approach to Technology, where I was training these underprivileged girls from settlements in Delhi in thinking about science and technology. So these were like really young high school kids. And it was a really big learning experience for me because I not only understood what it meant to kind of do technology or scientific work in settings which are not privileged, right? Like where they don't have access to things that we might have taken for granted. But also it made me realize that I have so much to learn in the space of how do you make sense of the world of society and what social factors shape us. So a very good example of that was that this organization's name, Feminist Approach to Technology, was a very provocative one, because I thought that, what does that even mean, right? Like, what does it mean to come at building technology from a feminist perspective? And from that moment onwards, I don't think I've looked back, because since then I've been like moved by wanting to explore this intersection more and more. And God's grace has also allowed me to pursue and find opportunities to keep pursuing it. And after that, I worked with this organization called Menstrupedia, which does some really cool work in trying to build technologies and actually comic books for addressing menstrual awareness in the country, which I think is very, very important. And so I think I saw all these people doing really cool work, and I thought that, there is space for people who want to bring technology in a space that is socially inspired and socially aware, and I wanted to be in that space. So that's basically how I made that sharp turn. It's actually not very sharp. I still work in information science, which is a very technology oriented field, but it lets me think about humans as much as I think about technology, which I think is what I wanted from my work. And I was lucky enough to find it in this space.
Excellent. I find it extremely inspiring, Palashi. See, as we move more into machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all of that, right? If you put humans in the center and have empathy-based perspective, right? Always that is where organizations as well as society is also progressing towards. I think there is no winning if part of your cadre is not winning, right? There is no charm in that. I think that is how do you find out where your team is? Is it your family, or is it you as a country, or you as a whole world, right? I think some extent, if you look at it, the whole theme of this decade is also about sustainability in terms of human capital, in terms of environment, in terms of how people are treated, equitable, and all of that. I think that's extremely pertinent. I think kudos to you. And so when you look at information sciences and their applications from the societal impact, right? What kind of challenges are you facing? I can tell from when I look at it from a scaling, or from a creating an performance system and all of that, I can imagine a lot of those things are already documented and kept. But when we look at it from a societal impact, it's a huge thing around change management. It's about creating the right impact, because there's just too many problems. So how do you create the best bang of in the buck? I mean, how do you decide that, and how do you go about?
Oh wow, that's $1 million question. I think the actually you've hit quite the heart of the problem, which is there's two issues, right? Like, one is the fact that we have so many issues, and each of these are contextual, right? Like, issues facing the United States, where I'm doing my PhD, are very different from what we face in India, and what within India, like smaller towns or rural communities are probably facing even more different issues than we would imagine in bigger cities. And so I do think that the problem of scale, as you mentioned, I think is also a problem that we face in thinking about how technology scale to communities that are not just in like privileged and things like that. So that's one. But then I also think the other side of it is that as much as we want to believe that technology is changing the world and changing societies, which it is, it's changing the way we live for sure. This change is disparate for people. And I think one of the critical challenges going forward, as you rightly mentioned, is not just sustainability of the planet we live on, but also the sustainability of humans. And I think that bit is really hard to crack, because I don't know if you recently read about this report that came out that Oxfam put out about income inequality in India, which has some really staggering numbers if you think about it. And I was talking to my father, who is a doctor, and he was talking to me about kind of like, my partner who's working in the IT industry, and I used to, but I don't anymore. And he was telling me that the kind of salaries you make in IT are just unimaginable for other people in other industries. And when we were growing up, this is the kind of money we would imagine making at like when we hit 50 years, 60 years kind of a thing. But I think that this is not to say that, like this kind of economic development in India is not important, but I do think that income inequality is increasing a lot in India, which is also where technology plays a role, right? Because you can see how technology jobs, while they're as precarious as we see because of the fact that they can be taken away, and they are being taken away at the drop of a hat recently, um, there is this tension which is deeply part of the policy and the structure of how technology arrives in some of these spaces. And I think that what we are lacking is a consideration of who is this technology being designed for, right? Like, is it being designed for the top 1%, for the top 10%, or is it being designed and built for communities that are not just that, right? And once you do decide to build for the communities, how do you scale them? How do you make sure that they're addressing the needs of these communities? And how do you bring them in the room and bring them into the conversation? So I actually think that technology has a lot of potential for changing the way that we think the world should be, and changing the way societies operate, but without really radically imagining a different structure in which, like only some communities continue to benefit from it. We cannot sustain this kind of movement of progress. And a very simple example of this is that I know that in the IT industry, and also in my conversations with some of the women I've been talking to, is like there's this move of trying to recruit from different parts of the country to be to expand the technology industry, which I think is great. But also at the same time, are we also making sure that the relationships that are being introduced with these new technologies arriving in these spaces are not disrupting some of the structures that people rely on very regularly, right? For example, if people are switching to becoming Uber drivers and they are putting their life saving in buying a car and then realizing that they can't even make enough for a day's living, I think that kind of disruption comes at a cost, right? So being really mindful about this disruption, but also being really invested in thinking about some of these spaces as being, like, disruption is sometimes an answer, but it's not the whole of answer. So I think there are many challenges. I'm sorry, I don't want to kind of take up all the time with this question, but I think if you had to put it down, I feel like the question of social equity and justice is the most important challenge facing our age, because we are progressing like crazy, as you've mentioned, in the field of technology, but at the same time so many people are being left behind. So how do you kind of make sure that this progress scales at the way that we want it to? So actually it's not very different from the kind of problems that you're talking about. It is a problem of scale, just a very different kind of perspective on it, I think.
Yeah, I can imagine, right? The scale is even more important. How much are you able to reach people? How much is the technology helping in terms of experience and everything? So in my recent travel, I went to rural Bihar and rural Chhattisgarh. So there you'll not believe. The same places I have traveled earlier, there will be a bank which is far and few between. And you'll really have to plan and ensure that you have all the cash and everything before you travel, because credit cards were lesser in number. Now, in 2022, when I'm traveling, it's completely, you can see a UPI payment everywhere. And you also not only see that, you also see a lot of Hindi being used. Earlier, there used to be lot more, for example, Bhojpuri was a language. So we, in fact, armed ourselves and said we will learn a bit of local language, local dialects, and then go. But I think some extent of harmonization is happening because of the technology availability and people moving from different locations, right? For example, the locations that I had gone, a couple of people had moved as part of the COVID, right? So they have brought in those changes. So I'm saying is, I think that change is happening. At the same time, are we bringing everybody along, and are everybody getting benefited? Obviously, capital is in play, right? Not everybody will be getting the same size of the pie, if you will. So coming back to the prioritization part of it, right? In social impactful programs, and how do you decide in terms of priority?
So do you mean it in the sense of like how do researchers decide, or how do companies decide, or how, like, who are you thinking about?
So I'm thinking from a, see, in the end of the day, social impact has to be done, and there are too many of them, right? Um, so and every organization has a CSR part of it. That, and some companies actually make it as a window dressing, and some company really imbibe it. So I think, are you also looking at it from that angle, in terms of using that as a weapon, and giving them tools in terms of prioritization? The prioritization of, let's say there are 4 or 5 such available possible impactful projects, creating that kind of for example, in a normal traditional programs, right? Very simple. How quickly, what is the velocity in which you are able to make it happen? What is the revenue? What is the bottom line? And what is the brand equity? I mean, very parameters are fairly straightforward there. But in social impact, that's not true, right? It's there it gets a little fuzzy in terms of who are you impacting, and are these the right people, and how hard is the change? Because I mean, every project in the end of the day needs that quote unquote success, right? So how do you really define your prioritization, Palashi? I mean, do you have a theory that you're developing?
So I am actually not the right person to answer this question, but I will answer from the basis of my own experience of having worked in nonprofit and being involved in CSR efforts and in whatever conversations I've had. So my topic doesn't necessarily deal with it in detail. But what I would say is that I think there is, what you said is absolutely right, in the sense that we have this sense of corporate social responsibility, which is it's very narrowly defined, I think, in the way that we have this percentage of profits that we dedicate, and we involve employees. I remember this was something that I noticed the first time, and was also one of the reasons I decided to move into thinking about tech in society, was that when I was at Deloitte, it was well, we had one of those days where the giving day, where everybody did volunteer work as part of the thing. As beautiful as it was, where everybody did this kind of work together, I also felt that it was a little bit like the imagination of what can be possible was really small, in the sense that just a day was not enough, right? And so I think that the challenge that actually I would encourage, and I wish the companies and organizations would take up, is that how do you imagine the question of capital, as you rightly mentioned, coming together with society? Like, how do we maximize relationships between social impact beyond thinking of a percentage of profit as our only commitment to society? So a very simple example of that would be that if we are thinking about our social responsibility, are we thinking about our social responsibility to the planet, to the employees that are not just in the sitting in these offices, but are also part of like extended parts of these organizations and what they use, right? So a very simple example of that would be that corporations like and this might be unpopular, so I'm already putting it out there, but I think one of the challenges that we have within the technology industry is that certain kinds of work are seen as part of technical work, which others are not, right? So for example, a Nokia electronics manufacturing company, it has these plants that have electronic manufacturing workers working in Tamil Nadu, but they are not seen as part of the technical labor, even though they are building these systems that make sure that we build the technologies and the softwares that we do. But I think we should expand the idea of corporate social responsibility to expand who counts as part of the stakeholders that we take care of, so that the social responsibility is not just measured in terms of how much money we give towards society, but also who do we bring in with our imagination of progress and capital and growth, right? Like who do we bring into the fold? And I think that is a really challenging thing to do because of the fact that we are so used to this setup, right? And it's also like part of the global setup. It's not just India that's doing that, right? Like the whole idea of outsourcing certain kinds of work in the technology industry to India and other parts of the world has the same problem, right? Like they think that certain kinds of labor need to be done by other parts of the world and it's cheap there and things like that. So I think this is an unpopular opinion, but I think the expansion of the idea of social responsibility needs to happen. Then the question of prioritization becomes very different, because then you're not thinking about whether we should give precedence to thinking about just women in technology or neurodivergent communities in technology. You're thinking about interconnections of like, how does women who do work both in the technology industry are also being supported by domestic workers in the house, and they are actually part of the technology industry. The technology industry will collapse. It did collapse actually in the pandemic. We saw so many women leaving the industry because of the fact that we just didn't have the kind of support we needed. So what does the social responsibility look like when we expand our ideas of who's part of the community? I think that's my provocation, and that's what I think should be the way to move forward in thinking about this.
Fantastic, Palashi. I remember you and I were having a conversation on when we talk about women in tech.
Yeah.
Who is women in tech? Is it only coding, or is it the business analysts, or project managers, or the HR, or the finance, or the people who actually come and help you in your office? Women there.
Right.
I mean, where do you? I mean, where do you draw the line, or do you need to have a line at all? Right. I think
Right.
that's really where it is. I think if you don't bring people along with you, then the collapse of ideology happens more accelerated way than in a smaller way. I think so. I think we've been talking about the past. What does future hold for you, Palashi? I think I'm very interested to understand. Because when we talk about social impact, intersection of different fields, right? I would imagine if it is it is not necessarily a mainstream kind of a program, right? You go for a fan kind of a company, or companies which are more. How do you where is your mind at in terms of what are your next steps after your PhD and you finish it by end of this year?
So my personal, I think there are many goals that you can achieve as a PhD student, can have many directions. You can go work with industry, go work in consulting, go work in academia. But I personally love teaching. So and I think it's an incredible opportunity, especially at the college level, where students are coming in with like a somewhat of a mature mindset, like something that it's a different way of engaging with learning, unlike the school level, which I've done and which is extremely tough, and I don't think I can do it again, because I think school teachers are actually angels sent from above, and I have immense respect for them, but I don't think I can do it. But the thing that excites me about college education, and which is what I want to do alongside doing research, is that not only does research get grounded in how do you train, in my example, I want to train engineers in thinking ethically about society and social impact. I think that is a real place to make change and really mold minds as they move into the world and do their own thing and shape the world. But also at the same time, it gives me an opportunity to learn from them, like stay in touch with younger generations that are going to be building the future of technology. So the future of technology is actually also in these classrooms that I want to teach in. At the same time, I think I have only scratched the surface of thinking about ideas of diversity, inclusion, social kind of justice in the field of technology, and I want to continue building on it. So I think my research will continue to build on the work I've done, ask more questions, trying to figure out policy answers, practice answers, answers of how do we move forward, but also at the same time build a source of knowledge from all the interviews I've been doing, all the conversations I've been having with amazing women and practitioners in the field. I want that knowledge to become more accessible to people who want to keep moving in this direction and find value in thinking about how is it that an industry which is really focused on building a progress and future and modernity also is deeply implicated in social relations. And so how are the women in these industries and other people in these industries imagining a different future, a different culture, a different space of technology going forward? So that's kind of what is in for me, and that makes me excited, makes me want to get out of bed every morning, because I feel like I'm really incredibly lucky to get to do this kind of work, which I find very meaningful and exciting to work on.
Wow, amazing, Palashi. I was actually planning to say, ask for, what are your messages to the software community at large? But I think equity and thinking, the ecosystem at large, I think is the underlying message that we've been speaking about.
Yeah, in fact, your conversation, the conversation we had as part of my research, really made me think about how much our lives are intertwined outside of the workplace with the work we do, right? So we end up thinking that our workplace is where work ends, but it doesn't. Like now it not even more than ever. And so I think it's if I had to give a message to the software community from my learnings of having been a software engineer and going forward, it's very easy to feel like this is the world that we live in and this is all that there is. But there's a world beyond that, and everything that we're consuming to everything we are seeing is all interconnected with different communities that are making it possible for us to see. So I think expanding our ideas of what our social responsibility is as builders, as engineers, as future makers of technologies is the way to kind of move forward and bring in the fold, like take the kind of skills and knowledge you have to the spaces that could really use it, and bring in the people that can really change the way that technologies are able to make a difference in the world, I think would be my message from my learnings of whatever I've been doing so far.
Fantastic, Palashi. Thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate, as part of the folks who are listening, hope you've got 1 ounce of inspiration, and please continue to do your fabulous work, Palashi. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.